Episode 29, Appalachian Weather Disasters. Hey y'all, I'm Heather, and this is Poison Appalachia, the dark side of Appalachia. As always, thank you for listening. Hope y'all enjoyed your little Valentine's Day gift from me. Since I couldn't get you all flowers or chocolates, and I thought the next best thing would be a bonus episode. February's rolling right along, I feel like. Maybe that's just me. The weather's pretty crappy though. So I had a couple of so-so ratings on Apple Podcasts, and I think it really got into my head. I feel like the last two episodes weren't that great because of that. I was trying to be too different, too perfect. I started thinking, my main fans, like me the way I am. I can't please everyone, and I'm just going to try to keep it this way, the way it always has been. And I guess if people don't like it, that's okay. Everyone's entitled to their own opinion. But on to this week's episode. A lot of Appalachia is in the mountains, and it almost feels like a protected area. But we're still prone to weather disasters. Actually, I live right on the river, and there's a big hill right behind me, and back in 1989, my house got hit by a tornado. I wasn't there at the time, or my family wasn't, and it was okay, but you think you're protected, and not necessarily. I'll be covering several of the disasters here today. Although they were all bad and caused extensive damage and loss of life, I'll start with one of the worst and then I'll end on another one at the end. So let's start with the Great Appalachian Storm in 1950. The Great Appalachian Storm of November 1950 was a large extratropical cyclone which moved through the eastern United States, causing blizzard conditions along the western slopes of the Appalachian Mountains and significant winds and heavy rainfall east of the mountains. Hurricane force winds peaking at 110 miles per hour in Concord, New Hampshire, and 160 miles per hour in the highlands of New England. It disrupted power to 1 million customers during the event. In all, the storm impacted 22 states, killing 383 people, injuring over 160, and causing $66.7 million in damage. That's equivalent to $845 million to their policyholders for damage resulting from the cyclone than any previous storm or hurricane at the time. The cyclone is only one of 26 storms to rank as a Category 5 on the Regional Snowfall Index. It was termed the Storm of the Century. A couple of these are termed the Storm of the Century, though, but this one was a bad one. In late 1950, the Great Appalachian Storm hammered not just the Appalachians, but also the Ohio Valley, Great Lakes, and Northeast with a combination of heavy snow, high winds, coastal flooding, and extreme cold. A slow-moving, powerful storm system dumped heavy snow across much of the central Appalachians from November 22nd to November 30th in 1950. Known as the Great Appalachian Storm of 1950, the system blanketed areas from western Pennsylvania southwards deep into West Virginia with over 30 inches of snow. Several locations received more than 50 inches of snow, and Coburn Creek, West Virginia, reported the greatest snowfall total, a staggering 62 inches, the still a state snowstorm record to this day. Given the extremity of the heavy snowfall and its aerial extent, NOAA's National Centers for Environmental Information ranked it as the most extreme winter storm on the record for the Ohio Valley. The storm then dragged record-smashing cold air south with temperatures as cold as -8 degrees in Allard, South Carolina, and 2 degrees in Boonville, Mississippi. Frigid cold also stretched into the northeast, into the Ohio Valley, and all the way down to the far southeast. Temperatures fell to 22 degrees Fahrenheit in Pensacola, Florida, 5 degrees in Birmingham, Alabama, 3 degrees in Atlanta, Georgia, and 1 degree in Asheville, North Carolina. And the record cold led to widespread crop damage, particularly in Georgia and South Carolina. Its damaging winds were no less incredible, with gusts to 94 miles per hour at what is now JFK Airport and 110 miles per hour at Concord, New Hampshire. These high winds led to coastal flooding from New Jersey to New England, including New York's LaGuardia Airport. Farther north, intense winds associated with the storm caused extensive tree damage, power outages, and coastal flooding in New England. In New Hampshire, Mount Washington observed gusts as high as 160 miles per hour, and onshore winds along the coast caused extreme high tides and flooding in New Jersey and Connecticut. After the storm, the eastern half of the country saw above normal temperatures during the first week of December. This led to a fast snowmelt, which flooded several tributaries and major rivers. In Pittsburgh, the Ohio River reached 28.5 feet, 4 feet above flood stage. In Cincinnati, it reached 56 feet, 4 feet above flood stage. At least 160 deaths were attributed to the storm, with damage of $66.7 million, the costliest weather event for American insurers at the time. This storm is a benchmark against which all other major storms of the 20th century could be compared. In Northeast the Great Appalachian Storm ranks as the ninth worst storm among the 211 analyzed. Over 30 inches of snow affecting 1.3 million people in the region largely contributed to the storm's RSL value of 14.5. With that value, it ranks just behind the more recent February 2003, February 2010, and January 2016 storms. The late February snowstorm of 1969 remains the strongest storm to hit the Northeast with an RSI value of 34.0, making it a Category 5 extreme event. The March 1993 storm of the century, which I'll mention in a little bit, remains the second strongest snowstorm to hit the Northeast with an RSI value of 22.1, making it a Category 5 event. So the next time you hear about a snowstorm coming up and the grocery store is wiped out, remember that some people had to live through this and passed it down through their kids. Nowadays, we aren't even trapped in our houses, but back then, it happened. The next storm I actually mentioned in my first episode on Chief Cornstalk's Curse, the 1944 Appalachian tornado outbreak. In 1944, Appalachian tornado outbreak was a deadly tornado outbreak that hit the Midwest and Mid-Atlantic regions of the United States on June 22nd through 23rd, 1944. The outbreak produced several strong tornadoes in Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Maryland, areas that were falsely believed to be immune to tornadoes. Particularly hard hit was the town of Shinston in Harrison County, West Virginia, which was destroyed by a violent F4 tornado before 9 p.m. on June 23rd. A total of 30 people died at Shinston, and at least 104 were killed in the state of West Virginia by this and two other intense tornadoes. The outbreak itself was and still remains the deadliest tornado outbreak to ever hit the state of West Virginia. The Shinston tornado was and is the only tornado to produce violent damage in West Virginia. The most destructive natural disaster in lives and property to occur in West Virginia came about as a result of the tornado at Shinston in Harrison County on June 23, 1944, when a total of 153 people lost their lives. This was but 9 miles from the Monoga mine, where in 1907, some 350 people lost their lives, the greatest disaster in the state and the greatest mine disaster in history. This tornado, the most severe one West Virginia has ever experienced, came about at 8:30 in the evening, when from the northwest a great black funnel-shaped cloud appeared, traveling about 40 miles per hour. Most people seeing it thought it to be fire of some kind until they noticed a heavy mass of debris, timbers, trees, etc. traveling before the cloud. Then they knew the worst. A barn was blown away, leaving the horse in the stall uninjured, but a 2x4 beam blew straight through a cow in the field. A pig pen disappeared, leaving the pigs. Hailstones were described as baseballs. 9 people were killed in the home of Charles Carlin on Peoria Hill at Shinston. All that were there, and when the house was demolished. But there were 17 people in the general store of Y.C. Holsbury at Meadowsville, and all but 3 were injured when the store collapsed completely. Holsbury lost 17 buildings in the tornado. A garage was carried away at Meadowville, the car inside undamaged. Some automobiles were blown 100 feet. Streetcar tracks were twisted as though made of macaroni, and a cook stove was found 3 miles away from its former home. A box containing $750 in bonds and valuables was carried miles away but returned to its owner. Numbers of bodies recovered from the West Fork River, one of them 40 miles downstream. A truck was loaded with 1,000 feet of green lumber. Only 5 pieces of the lumber remained after the storm. One woman was found dead, hurled through the air several hundred feet. The home of Paul Cox, Shin's Run, skidded 1,000 feet and then was borne through the air for 175 feet. His wife and 2 children died. To this day, is still the worst tornado that West Virginia has ever experienced. Flooding in Appalachia. I want to cover some of the flooding in Appalachia here, but still will save the most recent from Hurricane Helene to later section for just that. A lot of Appalachia is prone to flooding due to its landscape, which includes rolling hills and mountains. These features make it difficult to evacuate people and respond to flooding. I'll probably miss a lot of the flooding, but I'll try to cover some of the major ones here. The Great Flood of 1913. I'm only covering this very briefly because it didn't impact much of Appalachia, but I thought I should at least mention it. The Great Flood of 1913 occurred between March 23rd and March 26th after the major rivers in central and eastern United States flooded from runoff after several days of heavy rain. Related deaths and damage in the United States were widespread and extensive. While the exact number is not certain, flood-related deaths in Ohio, Indiana, and 11 other states are estimated at approximately 650. The official death toll range for Ohio falls between 422 and 470. Flood-related death estimates in Indiana range from 100 to 200. More than 250,000 people were left homeless. The death toll from the flood of 1913 places it second to Johnstown flood of 1889, which I covered, as one of the deadliest floods in the United States. I kept seeing mentions of a great flood in 1929 in Appalachia, but I really couldn't find anything about it. Next is the flood of 1937. The Ohio River flood of 1937 took place in late January and February 1937, with damage stretching from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania to Cairo, Illinois. 385 people died, 1 million people were left homeless, and property losses reached $500 million, which is equivalent to $10.2 billion when adjusted for inflation as of September 2022. Federal and state resources were strained to aid recovery as the disaster occurred during the depths of the Great Depression and a few years after the beginning of the Dust Bowl. Huntington, West Virginia, a city in the tri-state area that was built as a link between steamboat and railway commerce, experienced some of the worst flooding with a crest of 69.45 feet, which is 19 feet above flood stage. First responders, volunteers, and the Army Corps of Engineers navigated the city via rowboats and helped citizens to reach the relief shelters set up in undamaged churches and schools. Like other communities in the Ohio River Valley, Huntington was regularly visited by damaging floods, and business owners and community members were typically self-reliant in the aftermath. After the unprecedented damage of the 1937 flood, however, more substantive preventative measures were necessary. Immediately following the flood, the Chamber of Commerce pushed for the construction of a flood wall that would protect Huntington and the surrounding areas. Other areas of West Virginia were devastated by the flood as well. The Wheeling Island had to be evacuated as it was completely submerged when the flood crested at 47 feet. In Parkersburg, the river reached a crest of 55 feet. According to several local historians, the town of Gallipolis was completely submerged as high as the Mound Hill Cemetery overlook, and many rumors regarding the curse of Lafayette's gold treasure buried by slaves on Gallipolis Island began to surface around the town. This flood was very severe. I don't know anything about Lafayette's gold treasure or why he would bury in Gallipolis. He did visit there, but just like one night or so. Gallipolis is pretty much where I live, so I know a bit about its history, and I've never heard of Lafayette's treasure. But who knows? Maybe I'll have to look it up sometime. And I mentioned this in another episode, but my dad was like 3 or 4 at the time, and he remembers walking with his grandpa to see it, and he said he'd never seen anything like it. In Portsmouth, the rising river threatened to top the flood wall that was erected 10 feet above flood stage. City officials deliberately opened the floodgates and allowed river water to flood the business district 8 to 10 feet. City officials deliberately opened the floodgates and allowed river water to flood the business district 8 to 10 feet deep, thus preventing a catastrophic breaching of the flood wall. The Ohio River eventually crested 14 feet over the top of the flood wall. 10 people died, many fewer than the 467 killed in the floods of March 1913. Flooding from Hurricane Camille in 1969. This one hit Virginia harder than the others. Ohio Valley and West Virginia, Camille caused moderate damage. Rainfall in Kentucky and Tennessee measured between 3 to 5 inches, helping to relieve a drought in the area. Down in West Virginia, there was flash flooding, which destroyed 36 houses, 12 trailers, and a total of $750,000 in damage. But like I said, Virginia was hit hardest. Because the hurricane was expected to quickly dissipate over land, few were prepared for the flash flooding. Arriving over Virginia on the evening of August 19th, Camille was no longer a hurricane, but it carried high amounts of moisture and contained sufficient strength and low pressure to pull in additional moisture. A widespread area of the western and central Virginia received over 8 inches of rain from Camille's remains, leading to significant flooding across the state. A total of 153 people lost their lives from blunt trauma sustained during mountain slides to the flash flooding and not drowning. More than 123 of these deaths, including 21 members of one family, the Huffmans, were in Nelson County. Several victims of the hurricane in Nelson County remain unidentified. Landslides occurred on hillsides with a slope greater than 35%. In Nelson County, the number of deaths amounted to over 1% of the county's population. Camille was considered one of the worst natural disasters in central Virginia's recorded history. The storm dropped the torrential rainfall of 12 to 20 inches with a maximum of 27 inches. Most of the rainfall occurred in Virginia during a 3 to 5 hour period on August 19th through 20th. More than 5 inches of rain fell near the North Fork of the Tye River in only half an hour, with the grounds already saturated from previous rains. Many rivers flooded across the state, with the worst being the James River in Richmond, with a peak crest of 28.6 feet. Many rivers in Virginia and West Virginia set records for peak flood stages, causing numerous mudslides along mountainsides. In the mountain slopes between Charlottesville and Lynchburg, more than 26 inches of rain fell in 12 hours. But the worst was in Nelson County, where 27 inches fell. Their rainfall was so heavy that reports were received of birds drowning in the trees, cows floating down the Hat Creek, and of survivors having to cup hands around their mouth and nose in order to breathe. Though the official rainfall was recorded as 27 inches, unofficial estimates are much greater. Some estimate that more than 40 inches of rain fell at Davis Creek. So much rainfall fell in such a short time in Nelson County that, according to the National Weather Service at the time, it was the probable maximum rainfall which meteorologists compute to be theoretically possible. The ensuing flash floods and mudslides killed 153 people. In Nelson County alone, 133 bridges washed out, while in some places entire communities were underwater. The major flooding that occurred downstream cut off all communication between Richmond and the Shenandoah Valley. Waynesboro on the South River saw 8 feet of water downtown, and Buena Vista had more than 5 feet. Through Virginia, Camille destroyed 313 houses, 71 trailers, and 430 farm buildings. The hurricane affected 3,765 families in the area, and the total damage in the state amounted to $140.8 million, which is like $747 million today. 2022 Appalachian floods. Between July 6 and August 1st, 2022, widespread and catastrophic flooding swept through portions of eastern Kentucky, southwestern Virginia, and southern West Virginia. 45 people died from the floods. Entire homes and parts of some communities were swept away by the floodwaters, leading to costly damage to infrastructure in the region. Over 600 helicopter rescues and countless swift water rescues by boat were needed to evacuate people who were trapped by the quickly rising floodwaters. The flood event is said to be the deadliest natural disaster to hit eastern Kentucky in more than 80 years. July 26th, the flood event first began in southwestern Virginia. In Mingo County, the Gilbert Creek area along the Kentucky River-West Virginia border had several homes impacted and several bridges washed out, limiting access to some areas. More flooding occurred in nearby McDowell County as well, in addition to other areas. This, combined with additional rainfall and flooding on July 28th, led to a state of emergency being declared by Governor Jim Justice for 6 counties: Mingo, McDowell, Fayette, Greenbrier, Logan, and Wyoming. Partly as a result of the flooding, Huntington, West Virginia recorded their wettest July on record with 9.41 inches of rain. July 28th through 29th, Governor of Kentucky Andy Beshear declared a state of emergency on July 28th after what was described as a 1,000-year flooding event. The Kentucky Court of Justice closed the judicial centers in Floyd, Letcher, Magoffin, and Perry counties due to extreme flooding. The storms dumped up to 10.4 inches of rain on parts of the state. Kentucky cities severely affected by the floods include Hazard, Jackson, Paintsville, Prestonsburg, Martin, Pikeville, Hindman, Whitesburg, Fleming, Neon, and Jenkins. The fatality count from the event in Kentucky reached 38, with 17 deaths occurring in Knott County, 9 in Breathitt County, 7 in Perry County, 3 in Letcher County, and 2 in Clay County. A 39th fatality occurred in the days following the event due to an illness contracted during cleanup efforts. A 40th fatality occurred in September during cleanup efforts in Pike County. University professors and data analysts described the extreme flooding as made more likely by climate change in the United States. Meteorologist Jeff Berdelli of the WFLA in Tampa, Florida, commented that the flooding in Kentucky was simply in its own universe, and that an event that would happen on average 1 in 1,000 years before global warming made the likelihood greater. The government's 4th National Climate Assessment says that the heaviest precipitation events have intensified. Criticism was lobbed at local mining companies for failing to return the land to its natural state after decades of mining, and that caused the loss of natural ridge lines of vegetation. During July 25th to 30th was over 600% of normal totals. The 4-day rainfall totals of 14 to 16 inches in some areas reported to have less than 0.1% chance of occurring in any given year. On July 28th, Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear commented, "We are currently experiencing one of the worst, most devastating flood events in Kentucky's history." On July 29th, President Joe Biden declared that a major disaster existed in Kentucky and ordered federal aid to supplement state and local recovery efforts in the areas affected by severe storms, flooding, landslides, and mudslides. Search and rescue efforts continued for days following the floods. I'm going to cover a couple blizzards that impacted part of our area. The Great Blizzard of 1978 was a historic winter storm that struck the Ohio Valley and Great Lake regions of the United States, as well as southern Ontario in Canada, from Wednesday, January 25th through Friday, January 27th, 1978. It's often cited as one of the most severe blizzards in U.S. history. The third lowest non-tropical atmospheric pressure ever recorded in the mainland United States occurred as the storm passed over Mount Clemens, Michigan, where barometer readings fell to 956.0 MB on January 26th. This mainly just affected the Ohio Valley part of Appalachia, so I'll just briefly cover it. The blizzard was the worst in Ohio history. 51 people died as a result of the storm. Over 5,000 members of the Ohio National Guard were called to make numerous rescues. Police asked citizens with four-wheel drive vehicles or snowmobiles to transport doctors and nurses to the hospitals. From January 26th to 27th, the entire Ohio Turnpike was shut down for the first time ever. The total effect of transportation in Ohio was described by Major General James C. Clem of the Ohio National Guard as comparable to a nuclear attack. This hit more of the northern part of Ohio that isn't in Appalachia, but I know it hit part of the Appalachian area too. I was just a baby and don't remember it, obviously. But I remember teachers in school talking about it when I got older. My mom said that they were stuck in the house for so long that when she finally got me out, I was afraid of people. Now, I don't know if that's an exaggeration or not, but I always remember that story from her. The blizzard of 1993. Now, this one definitely hit most of Appalachia, if not all of it. The 1993 storm of the century, see, there we go, another storm of the century, was a cyclonic storm, or nor'easter, that formed over the Gulf of Mexico on March 12, 1993. The cold weather, heavy snowfall, high winds, and storm surge to the storm affected a very large area. At its height, it stretched from Canada to Honduras. The cyclone moved through the Gulf of Mexico and then through the eastern United States before moving on to eastern Canada. It eventually dissipated in the North Atlantic Ocean on March 15th. Heavy snow was first reported in the highland areas as far as south as Alabama and northern Georgia, with Union County, Georgia reporting up to 35 inches of snow. Birmingham, Alabama reported a rare 13 inches of snow. The Florida Panhandle reported around 6 to 12 inches of snow, with hurricane-force gust winds and recorded low barometric pressures. Between Louisiana and Cuba, the hurricane-force winds produced high storm surges across the Big Bend of Florida, which, in combination with scattered tornadoes, killed dozens of people. Record cold temperatures were seen across portions of the southern United States and eastern United States in the wake of the storm. In the United States, the storm was responsible for the loss of electric power to more than 10 million households. An estimated 40% of the country's population experienced the effects of the storm, and it led to a total of 208 fatalities. In all, the storm resulted in 318 deaths and caused $5.5 billion in damages. The greatest recorded snowfall amounts were at Mount LeConte in Tennessee, where 56 inches of snow fell, and Mount Mitchell in North Carolina, the tallest mountain in eastern North America, where 50 inches was measured to fall and 15-foot snowdrifts were reported. Some affected areas in the Appalachian Mountains saw 5 feet of snow and snowdrifts as high as 35 feet. The volume of the snow's total snowfall was later computed to be 12.91 cubic miles, an amount which would weigh, depending on the variable density of the snow, between 5.4 and 27 billion tons. The weight of record snowfalls collapsed several factory roofs in the south. Snowdrifts on the windward side of buildings caused a few decks with substandard anchoring to fall from homes. Though the storm was forecast to strike the snow-prone Appalachian Mountains, hundreds of people were nonetheless rescued from the Appalachians, many caught completely off guard in the Appalachian Trail or in cabins and lodges in remote locales. Snowdrifts up to 14 feet were observed at Mount Mitchell. Snowfall totals of between 2 to 3 feet were widespread across northwest North Carolina. Boone, North Carolina, in a high elevation area accustomed to heavy snowfalls, was nonetheless caught off guard by more than 30 inches of snow in 24 hours, and their temperatures were below 11 degrees Fahrenheit. Boone's Appalachian State University closed that week for the first time in its history. Stranded motorists at Deep Gap broke into Parkway Elementary School to survive, and National Guard helicopters dropped hay in fields to keep livestock from starving in northern North Carolina mountain counties. In Virginia, the Lancerlot Sports Arena in Vinton collapsed due to the weight of the record snowfall, forcing the Virginia Lancers of the ECHL to relocate to nearby Roanoke and become the Roanoke Express. Also collapsing were the roofs of Lowe's store in Christiansburg and the Dedmon Center at Radford University. Thousands of travelers were stranded along interstate highways in southwestern Virginia. Electricity was not restored to many isolated rural areas for up to 3 weeks, with power outages occurring all over the east. Nearly 60,000 lightning strikes were recorded as the storm swept over the country for a total of 72 hours. As one of the most powerful complex storms in recent history, this storm was described as the storm of the century by many of the areas affected. A hockey game hosted by the Philadelphia Flyers against the Los Angeles Kings was postponed due to a large window breaking from wind gusts just before the end of the first period. I was a band nerd, of course. I'm sure nobody's surprised about that. We were supposed to have a concert band competition that weekend, and we practiced so hard for it, and we had to cancel it, and it was never rescheduled. So I was kind of bummed about that. I remember I spent the weekend watching the hokey BBC Chronicles of Narnia miniseries. I don't know if y'all remember that, but that's what I did in the blizzard of 93, the storm of the century. I don't remember for sure, but I feel like the snow went away fairly quickly. Or maybe it didn't, but I don't feel like it did. I felt like it didn't linger. And maybe that's because it hit around in March, around the end of winter. While there have been several blizzards over the years, these are the two biggest hit in our area. Hurricanes have hit the Appalachian region over the years. Our Mississippi and Alabama Appalachians got hit pretty hard by Hurricane Katrina in 2005. Hurricane Hugo in 1989 hit Tennessee. Many others have dropped a lot of rain, but I think by far worst to hit Appalachia was last year's Hurricane Helene. Hurricane Helene was a deadly and devastating tropical cyclone that caused widespread catastrophic damage and numerous fatalities across the southeastern United States in late September of 2024. It was the strongest hurricane on record to strike the Big Bend region of Florida, the deadliest Atlantic hurricane since Maria in 2017, and the deadliest to strike the mainland U.S. since Katrina in 2005. Hurricane warnings extended further inland due to Helene's fast motion. The storm caused catastrophic rainfall, triggered flooding, particularly in western North Carolina, East Tennessee, and southwestern Virginia, and spawned numerous tornadoes. Although initially up to 115 deaths and more than 200 missing were attributed to Helene in North Carolina, including at least 40 in Buncombe County alone, that number was later revisited down to 103 as it emerged that significant double counting and misallocation occurred in Buncombe County. Areas in the Black Mountain region of the western part of the state were particularly devastated. Residents of Swannanoa also reported that no search and rescue operations had reached their location as of September 29th, leaving several residents who had not prepared for the degree of flooding without food and drinkable water. Data from the National Weather Service indicated that over 19 inches of rain fell in areas upstream of Chimney Rock, leading to devastating floodwaters that destroyed half of the village, including half of the businesses on the southern side of the village near the Broad River. The downtown of Elkham was heavily damaged by floodwaters from the Yadkin River. The Catawba River flooded Morganton and left thousands of residents without power. If you remember Morganton, I mentioned that last week on the Brown Mountain Lights, so once again, tying back into each other. The Oxford Dam at Lake Hickory on the Catawba River spilled over. More than 400 roads were closed in the western part of the state, and over 200 people had to be rescued from floods. Almost the entirety of Biltmore Village and the River Arts District were flooded, and the city was largely isolated due to loss of power or cell service. Landslides around Asheville caused sections of I-26 and I-40 to collapse or wash away, forcing closures of affected routes. Access to Asheville was cut off from September 27th through the 28th via I-26 to South Carolina. 36 people were killed in South Carolina, including 6 in Spartanburg and Greenville County, 4 in Aiken County and Anderson County, 3 in Lawrence County, 2 in Newberry County, and 1 in Chesterfield County, and 3 in Saluda County and 1 in Greenwood County. Over 1.3 million customers were without power in South Carolina, the most of any state impacted by Helene, with several counties experiencing near complete loss of power. Wind gusts reached 72 miles per hour in Aiken and Anderson and 75 miles per hour in Beaufort. Rainfall totals in the state peaked at 21.66 inches in Rocky Bottom. Helene spawned 21 tornadoes in the state. 5 of them were rated EF1, 1 was rated EFU, and the remaining 15 were rated EF0. Helicopter crews rescued 58 people with units from Virginia State Police assisting from Unicoi County Hospital in Irwin after the hospital was almost entirely submerged. Part of a set of bridges on I-23, I-26, and US 19 West spawning the Nolichucky River in Irwin were completely washed away. The Nashville Predators postponed a preseason game against the Tampa Bay Lightning to October 7th due to severe weather in the area. Nashville broke a daily rainfall record on September 27th. In Morristown, several trees fell, causing power lines to be snapped through the city. Wind gusts in Sparta reached 44 miles per hour. In Newport, the Pigeon River rose to over 3 times the flood stage and set a new record at 26 feet, flooding portions of the town and nearby I-40. One person was killed in Craig County after a tree fell onto a building. Another person was killed in Tazewell County when a falling tree struck them as they were cleaning debris. Rainfall reached 12.2 inches in the Grayson Highlands, where Galax saw around 8.6 inches of rain over a 72-hour period. In the New River Valley, high waters from Helene were seen as far north as Radford University. Damascus saw flooding of 19.5 feet. Over 70 water rescue operations occurred in the state, with the Virginia National Guard rappelling from helicopters and pulling people from cars. In West Virginia, heavy rainfall occurred. High water ran in Bluefield, and trees blocked multiple roadways. Elsewhere in the state were fallen trees across parts of the Fayette County. In Mercer County, more than 20,000 customers lost power due to Helene. The Denver Broncos, who were practicing at the Greenbrier Resort due to having 2 consecutive East Coast road games, were forced to hold one of their practices in the indoor tennis courts due to heavy rainfall. Helene's rains have been primarily beneficial, alleviating drought conditions which were in the state since August of 2024. In Huntington, a wind gust of 70 miles per hour was recorded, which was the second highest wind gust ever recorded at that station. Over 120,000 customers lost power in Ohio. An estimated 1,000 households have had sustained damage in Scioto County due to unexpected heavy rainfall, with 7 inches of rain falling within the span of a few hours. 400 damage reports have been filed as of September 30th, 2024. In the city of Cincinnati, rainfall reached 2.5 inches. Wind gusts in the state reached 76 miles per hour. In the state of Alabama, over 3,000 customers lost power. Isolated regions of Geneva County and Houston County experienced 6 to 8 inches of rain. However, a last second shift to the east lessened impacts throughout the state. So Hurricane Helene definitely had a huge impact on Appalachia. And Appalachians are still feeling this effect today, unfortunately. Our southern Appalachian friends will feel it for quite some time, I think. It's hard to believe what damage nature can do. This is probably just a small amount of other disasters that hit our region, but definitely some of the worst. A lot of us have lived through a lot of these. I guess we just can't underestimate the power of the weather. If you have any stories from these, let me know. Thanks for listening. I had one idea for next week's episode, but I think I'm going to change it. So who knows what I'll be doing? I don't, that's for sure. Follow me on social media under Poison Appalachia. You can visit my website at poisonappalachia.com. If you could, please rate and like me on whatever podcast y'all listen to if it's available, even if it's not a good rating. And share. Help me get the word out and get more listeners. Have a good week. Talk to y'all later.